Hey, it's Chad here. Welcome back into another episode of A Level Deeper. I've got another great conversation to share with you today. This one in particular is with a new friend, Chris Young. Chris was introduced to me by friend of the show, multi-repeat guest, Nate Langley. And essentially it was like, hey, Chad, this is my friend Chris. He is a backpacking guide who works in the Arizona area and specifically around the Grand Canyon. And pretty much at that point, I was hooked as I was trying to coordinate times to record an interview with Chris. You know, he was mentioning like, hey, you know, I could book maybe 2 or 3 weeks in advance. I'm pretty much going to be offline the whole entire time before that. You know, I've got a couple trips planned and I'm going to be off grid. And I was just like, I'm in. I'm hooked. I want to learn more. Those of you who have listened to the show for a while know I'm just endlessly fascinated by people who choose different paths in life and live lives that are just different from the norm. It's definitely been my reality. And so I like hearing from other people who have done the same kind of thing. As I usually find is the case on the show, Chris just has a unique story of how he became the person that I got to talk to in this conversation. And I think you're going to really enjoy hearing some of his unique perspectives and the story, the things in his life that have happened have shaped who he is. All right, before we head into this conversation, I do just want to let you know that we have a real and open and honest conversation about suicide in this podcast. And so I want you to be aware of that. And if you are someone who is struggling with your mental health, if you are having suicidal thoughts, I just want to direct you to the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can text or call 988 to get in touch with someone who can help. Ultimately, I hope from hearing Chris's story, you just realize that no matter where you are in your life and in your mental health journey, you're not alone. And anyway, I think you're going to see a lot of value in Chris and him sharing his story. It's a story of resiliency, exploration, and adventure. And I can pretty much guarantee that you're going to enjoy hearing it. So anyway, it's all ahead on A Level Deeper. Here's my conversation with Chris Young.
You're in Alaska right now, aren't you?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, you know, if we both, since the last time we saw each other 45 minutes ago, if we both went outside and did a little head clearing, I was going to be like, I wonder if Chris also had to wear his winter coat and a hat and gloves.
Oh, no. I was in a pair of sandals and shorts, and I was like sweating. So,
for reference here, Chris is in Arizona. I am in Alaska. It's 30 degrees today in Alaska. What about in Arizona?
I think it was like when I was driving over here it was 86. So, but where I work in the canyon, so I did a backpacking trip. It was 105. And then my very next backpacking trip was snow. Like I walked through snow on the top, and the North Rim had gotten 10 inches that day. So,
how far apart are those two experiences? I mean, that's an extreme.
About a week.
Oh my gosh.
1 week. Yeah.
And the temperature can change that much.
Oh, drastically. And I mean, and there's also always a huge variability between the bottom and the top of the canyon. So like you're always looking at like between 15 and maybe sometimes 20 or more degrees difference between bottom and top.
Wow, that is interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to dive into you know what you do for work. I want to talk about the Grand Canyon. I wanted to start with, you know, as we were preparing for this conversation, quickly, you had made the comment about how, you know, you're good at being outside. You're not good with technology as we were getting set up for this conversation.
Yeah.
Which of those skill sets do you think is more important to have?
For me, currently how I exist, the outdoor one is obviously, yeah, you know, without delving into it too much immediately, but the outdoors is particularly like a special place for me. So it's where I spend most of my time and energy, and it's where like I gain solace and solitude, and it's where I center myself. So for me personally, it is the most valuable, like having outdoor skills.
Yeah, I mean, what if you applied it beyond just yourself and your own preferences? Do you think it's more important to have outdoor skills versus technological skills?
On a day-to-day basis, the way we exist as humans now, probably not. But if shit always hits the fan, everybody tells me they're coming to me. So,
So,
um,
yeah, right. I mean,
you
that's
know,
something.
but yeah, I mean, other than myself, like, it tends to be pretty nice just because I get to share that with other people. So not just for me, but I get to impart my abilities and teach others how to recreate responsibly outdoors.
You say the way that society is set up, maybe it's not the most like useful skill set. I guess that's why I asked the question, is because I just think it's really interesting. Like, we live in a day and age where technology and AI and being technology driven and technology enabled and all of these things are projected as being very
Mm-hmm.
important in society. These are the things that are going to lead to future success. It's all the software and the tech
Yep.
companies that are, the this is the future of society. So to hear you say, I'm good at being outside but not technology, it just kind of made me pause for a second, and I was like, okay, I understand that this is the way that society is set up, but
Mm-hmm.
then it brings me to the question of, is society set up in an optimal way? Is society set up with a focus and an emphasis on what is actually important?
That's the underlying factor. I would say no. There's a lot of people that live very different lives than me, and they love the comforts of. I mean, as do I. After a backpacking trip or spending 5 to 10 days in the backcountry, I thoroughly enjoy a climate controlled house and a shower and rotting on my couch for a day. Like, a lot of people see all my adventures that I do, and they're like, man, you're always going and doing this and doing that. But like, oh, you don't, you don't see the days where I'm just existing as a potato on my couch in between those. So, um, but societally speaking, it's like, yeah, I don't know if it's optimal for, I don't think it's optimal for overall happiness, is what I'll say.
Tell me more.
Um, so I'm a firm believer that if I didn't have my relationship with the outdoors, that I wouldn't be here today. So I've had kind of a troubled past, which I think is probably why Nate put me in touch with you. And the outdoors is just like really saved me, for lack of better words.
I mean, let's dive in, man. Tell me about the story. Troubled past to outdoor saving you. Hey, it's Chad here, and this is an ad for this show. I want to personally say thanks for tuning in to the podcast. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for a while, it means a lot that you're here. I'm not asking you for money. Actually, I'm asking for you to take a small action to help grow the show. More specifically, there's 3 things you can do to help grow the show and spread meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here. First is to leave a rating or review for the show on the platform that you're listening on. It takes about 10 seconds and can make a big difference. Number 2 is to subscribe or follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on, just so that you make sure you get notified of each episode that's published. Lastly, number 3 is to share the episode. Whether you send a text to a friend, talk about the episode at your next book club, or make a post on social media, sharing goes a long way to help. So thanks again for listening, and thanks in advance for taking a small action to help the show. Okay, back to the episode.
So trying to figure out how far to go back. So basically, in college, I started being a river guide. So I worked as a whitewater raft guide for like 7 years. And so in terms of people that party hard, there's rock stars, and then there's river guides, and then there's whoever's below that. And so it's very easy to just really get caught up in that scene. And I don't think there's inherently there's nothing wrong with enjoying things recreationally, if you have a healthy relationship with it. But I am somebody who, and this kind of applies to my entire life. I am somebody who very much, anything I do, I'm all in. Like, whether I'm being a river guide, a backpacking guide, whether I'm picking up a hobby or whatever it may be, I just go all in. It's like almost becomes a personality trait of mine. And so that's kind of what the party lifestyle became for me. I I literally would always make the joke that I wanted to be that guy. So like you don't need to know my name, but hey, you remember that guy that did that crazy thing? Like I was like, cool. I don't care if you don't have to call me Chris. You can call me that guy. I'll be that guy. And
Why? Like, what was behind that? Just being seen in some way,
I
being
think so.
remembered.
Yeah, very much. I mean, so like I have like a childhood past that wasn't the best. I come from a large family of women. Um, I had an absolutely terrible relationship with my stepfather.
Hmm.
He kind of constantly insulted me. I had like a lot of problems with my ego and just self worth, like a lack of self worth. And so then my ego told me like I have to be the seen and the biggest and the best and everything you do you have to go big for.
Yeah.
And so, um, but there's also an underlying mental health problem kind of in my family. Depression and addiction kind of first off go hand in hand, but also are seen throughout my family. And so it was just constant partying, drugs. And I always told myself it was like a social thing because, we're all hanging out. We're river guys. It's what we do. And then, but if you're hanging out if you live in a raft guide house, then it's always a social thing 7 days a week.
Social thing becomes constant.
It becomes life. Yeah. So, um, and, and so really my depression. So everybody has these like kind of, this linear line that usually is flat, that you have highs and you have lows and it goes up and, above and below that line. Mine was starting to trend downwards. So my depression just became really severe. On the outside, I was still the great, fun, super party animal. Like I was a good time. Everybody enjoyed me. Everybody saw the happiness, but they didn't see that like waking up feeling like an absolute disappointment to myself, a disappointment to everyone else, and the anxiety that just you get ridden with. And so, just to put it bluntly, I was getting suicidal. And so, my line was trending downwards. So my highs were becoming lower and my lows were becoming dangerously low. One day I grabbed a gun, went to my van. I was living in a van at the time, went into my van, put the gun against my head, and turned up a bottle of whiskey, trying to like finally make it happen. And so then I blacked out. And I remember waking up the next morning by rolling onto the gun and just like it all starts clicking of what happened. And it wasn't even like an immediate, oh, this is it for me. It just, I really was like, something's got to change here. And so I went out drinking the next week or like a week later, and I literally just left. I didn't tell anybody about this experience. So this happened. I don't tell anyone. I go out drinking the next week and I like started tearing up at the party and I was just like, I gotta go. And they're like, what's wrong? I was like, I just bye. And I just walked out and went home.
Wow.
And so then after that, I kind of went home to my mother's house for the next like month and a half. And I was like, cool, I'm going to give myself a fighting chance. I quit smoking cigarettes. I quit alcohol. At the time I quit smoking weed, started eating right and working out intentionally. And it was like a complete overhaul of my life. I was like, like I'm not even giving myself a chance. And so this was just like a kind of a window that I was like, I'm going to do this for 3 months. And although, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so like what spurred the change? I mean, first of all, I thank you for being, willing to be open and to share
Yeah.
your story and experience. I don't take that lightly. And so I appreciate it. I value
Yeah.
your transparency. Yeah. And, I'm just curious about like what can you attribute that shift to where just, that switch kind of flipped and it's like, all right, I'm going to make some radical changes to my life. What happened?
So it really just became, it was always this idea. And then I started to I was about to act on that idea of suicide.
Yeah.
And I was about to act on it. And then it was just became very, very real. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It wasn't just this like, oh, I could do this. I could. And I was like, oh man, I came like dangerously close to that. And so it became real. And at that point I became like scared. Like generally suicide tends to be from like what I've read on literature after this, it tends to be a situational thing. You hit a low point and you have the availability to make it happen. But generally speaking, it's like anybody that survived, or most of the people that have survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge in an attempt of suicide, most of them said they regretted it immediately as they jumped. So like it's a very situational thing. And so I kind of like got scared. Like ultimately I didn't really want that. Although in that moment I felt like it while I was drunk, I felt like just garbage. And so that's kind of like what spurred it. It was honestly a fear for my life.
Yeah.
It was my version of a rock bottom. Most alcoholics have a version of rock bottom, and that was mine. And so I went home, took that. And after like 4 months of me living clean and really focusing on both physical and mental health, although sobriety doesn't fix your problems, because usually you've blanketed or you've like masked all your problems by using the drugs. So then you like get hit full. It's actually really hard in those first few months of sobriety because it's just like, oh, like now I have to really deal with all these emotions that I've buried for over a decade. But after 4 months or so, it was about, I was like, oh, well, I'm actually happy. Like, don't get me wrong, I still have low times and I still have all these things I need to work through, but like, I don't hate myself as the default. Like, I don't
Mm.
wake up hating myself every morning. And so then I just decided I'll never go back. And that was like 6 years ago. And it actually took me about, it was like almost 3 years before I ever told anybody that situation ever happened. Like people didn't know why I was getting sober. They just thought I was like, oh man, like why you didn't really have a problem. Like you were always fun and stuff. But like I was like, they didn't see all the on the backside of things. And so it took me about 3 years. And you thanked me for being like very candid and open about it. But for me, that was when the healing actually began. It took like 3 years. And when I talked about it, I just was like pouring tears. I was
Mm.
telling it to my mom, which is even, no mom wants to hear about this from her son.
It's hard.
And so I was just like, when I went to go tell it, it took me like 5 minutes to even speak the word. I was just crying so hard. And so then I was like, oh my God, there's like this huge, huge weight just like drifted off. And so like I made a point. It's like, cool, I'm going to tell all my best friends about this. Actually, there's probably, I've been a little bit more open about it, but I don't think I've told some of my family about this. I told my dad, I told a lot of my best friends. And the more I talked about it, the more I healed. And so that's why I'm very, very open about it. And I've actually, because of my experience, I've been able to help some buddies of mine um, who have only known me in sobriety. So like when you meet somebody, an addict and they meet you in sobriety, they're like, oh, it's easy. You have your life together. It's like, it took years and a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. So
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. And it makes sense that, people meet you at that moment, but they don't get to see the years and the journey that it took
mm-hmm.
to get to that point. But that's the beauty of being willing to share your story, and that's
Yep.
why I commend you and I appreciate you being willing to share, because now for me and for someone else listening to this conversation, it's another example of what is possible if someone
Yep.
is in a place where they're struggling with addiction, if someone is in a place where they are having suicidal thoughts and that's part of their reality. There's a different reality that is possible and that can be
Yeah.
possible. So that's why I think it's so valuable that people like you are willing to share.
And I think it's important to like I said, sobriety doesn't fix problems. It allows you to work on yourself to fix the problems. And that's where it's like sobriety is the first step in the work. And it takes like, it's like going to the gym. Say you're extremely overweight and you want to lose 100 pounds. that's something that's going to literally take years and years of consistency and commitment. And it's like, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. It's like 6 years later, I'm still like having these revelations about myself. I'm like, oh, this is why I've been carrying all this hate and anger with me. And so like it's taken years. Still, it's always a work in progress. Like I don't have any desire to ever go back to days of drinking or doing drugs or anything. Like it's not even in my wheelhouse. But there is times I start to revert back into old habits. I was like, no, no, no. Like first off, self love. Like it's super, super important. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it really is. Like you got to love yourself before you can like exude love to others. So
Yeah, that's important. All right, so take us back to nature and
yep.
how this fits into the equation. I mean, you went through some of this process of becoming sober, of, as you said, starting to face some of these problems or some of these things that have been maybe hidden beneath some of the drug usage or alcohol usage.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell us more about how nature fits into this. And you made the comment that nature saved you.
For me, it's just I have, it's, like I said, it's where I feel most grounded. It's like the closest thing I feel like going to church, or it's my God. And so for me, it's just so we'll wait on that. But basically, it's just if I had done so, I've got a bachelor's degree in marketing and management, and if I had gone that path, I'm very obviously there's no way to know, but I very firmly believe that I would have pulled that trigger, and um, like I am happiest when outside. And so somebody asked me, it's something I still think months ago. It's like, what are your rules to live by?
Hmm.
Like if you were to set and make a list of rules that defines your life and how you want to live, and then somebody gave an example, and it's like if you have a negative thought and it's inside, don't trust that thought. Go outside and exist in nature for a bit, come back to that thought, and then maybe if it still rings true to you, then it is an actual true possibly thought that's like the negativity of it may actually have some bearing as opposed to like just inherently believing this negative thought. And I was like, man, it's like a really resounding way to make me look at things.
Why? What about nature, influences the way that we think, or some of our thoughts in a way that would be an important step?
I mean, I think there's just some like scientific, like vitamin D is good for us. It's like seasonal affective disorder is very real. We stay inside all winter. We don't get sunlight. We don't get fresh air. I think some of it's just on a science level, like being outside is good for us. Like we get more dopamine, more serotonin when we're outside. It's just like statistically or scientifically true. Like, that is what happens. And so I can only speak for myself, but like I said, it's just my happy place is outside, like literally being under the trees and absorbing some sun. I like to do cold plunges, and so I'll submerge myself in the rivers. And I don't let me go ahead and clarify. I don't like doing cold plunges.
Same.
I get into that cold water painfully, and then by the time I come out, I'm like really enjoying it. But it's like it's a disciplinary thing. But yeah, I think it's just for me. I can't really speak for other people's experience, but for me, that is where I feel the most grounded. Literally, it's like there's like this thing that I guess we've been going around on Instagram, like touch grass. Like, yeah, you just need to touch. When was the last time you touched grass? And it's like, cool. It's hard for me to put in words, honestly. It's such like a spiritual place for me. It's like people can't put their spirituality or their religion or whatever it is that lights them on fire. It's like hard to always put that into words.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just interesting to reflect on. Again, we go back to this idea of like where society sort of is right now. And it feels like, my wife and I have spent the last 2.5 years living in our van on the road. And that's come
nice.
with a lot of time being outside and a lot of time in nature. And it just kind of made me more aware of how much our typical day-to-day lives are set up to separate us from nature and separate us
Yep.
from spending outside, being outside. I had come across there's a social media post of a comedian. I'm going to butcher it, but let's see if I can get
Yeah.
the gist for you in the audience. And he was doing a bit about, buying a new house and then asking people like, so what should I kind of do, with my house? How should I furnish it? And like getting people's advice. And essentially, all the traditional advice is like, well, you should go like take plants, from outside, and then you should bring them inside.
Inside.
And you should create these big windows so that the light that is outside comes inside. And then you should get a dog who loves being outside, and then bring it inside, but then it's just going to ask you to go outside all the time. Just kind of that idea that like we've formatted these lives that are very inside oriented, but yet I think we all kind of know and like have this deep knowing of like our bodies crave the outdoors, they crave nature. So we try to bring it into our homes as much as possible, but maybe the solution is just to get outside of your home.
Yeah, it's funny. I've actually sent that reel to like 10 people.
I
One of the
think it's
comedians you're
hilarious,
talking
yeah.
about. It's like so spot on. Yeah. So let me ask you. You said you crave to be outside. We as humans, can you articulate why you crave to be outside?
I have noticed as I reflect on moments where I feel the most alive, moments where I perceive the most clarity, moments where I feel physically in my body the most present and the most aware. If I track those moments, and I actually just did this last weekend with a friend here in Alaska. Her name's Mel, and she's working on this idea of this Play Big playbook. But part of it is reflecting on like what are the times you feel most alive, and that will help tell you about what you value. And all of mine had to do with like being outdoors, being in nature, doing some kind of physical and mental challenge. And so anyway, if I just reflect on all of these times where I really feel embodied, I feel like myself, I feel clear. I'm outside, I'm outdoors, I'm in nature, and I just have these moments of, I call them moments of wonder and awe, where you can really just like be present and be like, wow, this is really a special moment. I've never had that happen when I'm sitting inside somewhere.
So yeah, that's my answer. You articulated that really well. So that's what I said. I'm going to use that as my answer.
Ditto. Yeah.
Yeah. Very well put, honestly, man. Like, present, like you said, like that's where you're most present. So that's one of the reasons I love drafting. It's like the worst thing could be happening in life. And you go out on the river and it's like, I can't worry about paying bills. I'm about to hit a rapid. Like I'm yelling at you to paddle forward right now. I'm not thinking about all the life stress that I have that's off this river right now. The same, and backpacking is a slower. So yeah, I'm a backpacking guide right now. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I've talked about working in the Grand Canyon, but like that's a little slower. So it is very easy to like wander off and start thinking about like, cause hiking, you have a lot of quiet moments where you are just really processing some life stuff, but still it's like, even when that starts to creep in, sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? I'm in the Grand Canyon. I can't be worrying about bills. Like, enjoy this space. Like, why are you going to take this beautiful space that you enjoy so much and ruin it with all these negative thoughts about life?
All right. So how does one become a backpacking guide? I mean, this is what you do professionally, right?
Professionally. Yes. Professionally.
How is this possible?
It's fine. I just, I'm a very big advocate of like, if it's meant to be, it will be. And sometimes the universe just kind of has a weird way of working. So I go from river guiding and I give that up. I go and work and then run a cannabis farm actually in California for like six years. And then I gave that up and I landed in Arizona. So like I lived on the farm. And so when I quit that job, I lost my housing. So it's like, cool. I have no house, I have nowhere to live and I have no job. And so I was just like, I had a friend that lived in this area and I had visited before. I was like, yeah, Arizona sounds great. Let's make that happen. And so I came to Arizona, and I'm just at that time, I was like, I'm in this transitional period of not knowing what's kind of happening with life. I don't want to go back to cannabis, the cannabis industry. Um, I, I have, although some of my best memories are from rafting, some of my worst memories are from that time in my life. Like
Mm.
when I got sober, that event happened, I left the rafting community and never went back. So I was like, cool, river guiding's out because it has so many negative connotations. Which actually I'm doing my first big river trip here in a couple weeks since leaving the community. I'm doing a 22-day river trip through the canyon.
Which I mean, I feel like that is very symbolic. Like that is worth not glancing over, because
Yeah.
that to me, if river guiding kind of became this like, nope, that's my past and that
Mm-hmm.
was old me and now I'm not going to do that, to be at a point where you can revisit and go back to
Yeah.
that version of you and kind of meet it in a new way, that's really significant.
I'm super stoked on it. It's going to be a big moment for me of like, I did my work. Like you said, it is symbolic. Like I've done a lot of work. I'm in a place where I can enjoy this. And this is going to be a different style. So I'm going to be doing, since it's 22 days, you, it's 12 people and you really create a bond. So like, I think there are going to be a couple other sober people on this trip too, which is going to be really nice for me. Um, and so yeah, it is symbolic actually. Like there's so many. I'm really excited. First off, I get to do it in the Grand Canyon, which is something I've been wanting to do since I was a raft guide over 10 years ago. I now have this personal relationship with the Grand Canyon. I, I, Rafting was always like, I always say it was my first love. Like that was, I was obsessed with river guiding, and then I just walked away. And so it was like both very hard, but also very easy because I had all these like weird. It was very hard because, like I said, some of my best experiences ever at that time were river guiding, and some of my worst experiences and lowest were also. So yeah, it's something I shouldn't glance over. It's something I'm very excited about, and it is kind of a moment.
Yeah, good for you, man. I think that's important to reflect on. Okay, so you were saying,
Yeah,
things happen for a reason, and
and so I came to Arizona. I literally was just serving tables. I live outside at the time. I was living outside of Sedona, um, and I still live. Currently, I live outside of Sedona. I'm moving to Flagstaff here soon, but um, so I'm living outside of Sedona, and the housing situation, although I know it's rough countrywide, mostly like especially in the West, housing is kind of a thing that's going on, and specifically outside of Sedona. Like Sedona's become so saturated, can't afford Sedona, so they live in other places. And so in 1 year, I went to 3 different serving positions and went through 3 different living situations. And I was just like constantly in flux. I wasn't, there's nothing wrong with serving. It's still something I do in between like my high season. Like when it gets slows down for me in the winter and the summer, I go back to serving and bartending and stuff. And so it's, it, I don't want anything like there's nothing wrong with it. I don't want anybody to inherently think that I'm like shitting on it. If I'm being honest, I'm not. It's a great living for me though. It wasn't my purpose, and I didn't feel fulfilled in that moment. And so I was just kind of like aimlessly existing in the world, and that didn't feel okay with me. Um, and so I literally, my third housing situation a year falls apart. And so I just walk into work and I go, hey, this is my 2 weeks notice. And they're like, oh, what? Where are you going? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to go back and live in my truck. And they're like, hold on. Like the normal person, like we're talking about society. They can't wrap, I'm like, they can't wrap their head around it. And so I'm just like, yeah, I'm done. They're like, so what are you going to do? I'm like, whatever I want. I've got a decent little savings. I'm going to move in my truck. The only thing I'm going to do is be happy because I'm not happy right now, and I'm going to make a change to be happy.
Hmm.
And so I told him, I was like, here's my 2 weeks. Like, if you need 3 weeks, like, I don't have anything that I don't need to be anywhere. I don't have a new job lined up. So, find another bartender and then I'll phase out. Because like I like the people that I was working with. I love the company I was working for was great. Um, nothing wrong with him inherently. It just wasn't fulfilling a life purpose. And so then in that window of the 2 to 3 weeks that I was working, a friend or an acquaintance friend of mine kind of came in, and she was basically very high up at this company. And she goes, "Oh, she knew I'd been a river guide, and she knew I was like about to live in my truck. She knew I like lived that lifestyle." And she goes, "Well, why don't you come work for Wildland?" And so I was like, "Yeah, well, why don't I?" And then I literally just applied and got the job. They originally actually hired me as a day hiker, which is like not, I wanted to be a backpacking guide, but they're like, well, foot in the door is like the best thing. You can do day hikes for like a whole year and then we can move you up. And then I come to find out like a couple weeks later, they were actually really needing backpacking guides in Colorado. And I was like, cool. Well, I live in my truck now, so I can move anywhere. I can go up to Colorado. And they're like, cool, we'll train you. And so I kind of like slid my way into being a backpacking guide immediately as opposed to having to like work my way up. And then I assumed when I came back to the Grand Canyon that they were going to make me a day hike guide. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, schedule's posted. It was all backpacking trips. So I was like, yes. So like literally it was just kind of serendipitous. Like one of those things where the universe just had its own plans for me. And I just had to like succumb to what was going on. It literally was like I was fighting it for a year of like trying to live a normal life. I'd been so nomadic my whole life and kind of worked here and worked there. And I spent like years living in tents and um, vans and trailers and living this unconventional life. I was like, cool, I'm gonna be quote unquote normal. And then I was like, yep, not happy. And as soon as I surrendered, it just fell into my lap.
I mean, it's just incredible to me how life, the universe, I don't know, I'm revisiting my relationship with and getting more comfortable saying God is undefeated as far as you just providing opportunity and providing the right path. Sometimes it's like in just like your story and your situation, sometimes we have to just make decisions to move things out of the way so that things can unfold for us. You know, you made a gut decision, a feeling decision. You didn't make a logic decision when you left your job and you had nothing else to necessarily go to in that moment. That's just like I'm not living to my purpose. I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. I don't know what's next, but I'm going to get this out of the way so I can become open to whatever that is. And I just it's just so cool. It feels like, you know, the more we can do that, and this is just a reminder to myself of the more we can remove the things that aren't serving us and not have an exact thing to fill it in with, then we're open. We're open to possibility. We're open to the unknown. And that can be a really, really positive, beautiful thing, as it was for you.
Yeah. And that's, I was very lucky to be able to do that. Like I was debt free. I had money saved. So like I'm not saying to everybody, hey, go in and quit your job. That's where you're gonna find happiness. It's not the move for everybody. There's definitely ways to make that happen. But like I do think there should be more, just generally speaking, in this world, more of like, this isn't serving me. Like you said, this isn't serving me. There's other opportunities. It's very easy as us as human beings to get stuck in routine and habits, and change can be scary. But literally, like some of the best things that's ever happened to me in my entire life were me just being like, I'm out. And it's like, it's scary, but I'm going to completely turn my life upside down. That's how it was with rafting. Like, I literally just like annoyed this guy about he was a river guide for 10 years. I was serving tables with him at Texas Roadhouse. And I was just annoying this guy over and over. I was like, asking him all kinds of questions. Like, how did you get in this? He's like, do you want me to like call and get you a job? And he called. He's like, good news, bad news. Good news, you got the job. You just got to go down for training. Bad news is training starts in 6 days. So I was like, in minutes, I go, cool, I'll go. And I immediately called my work and I go, this is a 5-day notice. I had to call my mom and be like, I was like 21 at the time. I'm like, Mom, I'm leaving on Mother's Day to go be a river guide, and I'll see you in a few months, And she was like, what? It's like, yeah, this is happening. Sorry. Like, I love you, but I'm leaving. And so it was just like literally like this radical life change. And then literally, that me being a river guide basically changed the entire course of my life. It's like, oh, there's another life than being stuck in a marketing job that I'm not passionate about and I don't care about. Like, like one of my marketing um teachers, he worked for like Procter and Gamble. Like he was doing like marketing for diapers. It's like, sure, I mean that's a needed niche in this world, I guess, but like there's no way he was passionate about that. He was doing that to make money, and not inherently anything wrong with that. I understand wanting some people desire security. For me, security is happiness. So,
Hmm. It's been interesting. I'm currently on the show doing this series that's about work. I'm calling it "What Are We Working For?" and I'm kind of exploring like what is the role that people want work to play in their lives, and it's been interesting. This episode will probably come out after the series is actually wrapped up.
oh,
But
cool.
I was just thinking about earlier today how for me it feels like work is like this vehicle, and at different points in my life different vehicles are going to make sense for different situations. It's kind of like maybe when you're young you're fine having like a two-seater or like a fast car or something like that, and then maybe you have a family and you're like, well, I need a minivan or I need something bigger. That's kind of how I'm like viewing work in my life. I've had a lot of different careers. I started working at General Motors, working for a huge Fortune 100 company,
Yep.
and went off and did my own thing. And I was a landscaper and a painter, and then I've ended up in the marketing world. But it's just been interesting reflecting on like, what do I want work to represent? My career, my day to day is in marketing.
Okay.
Um, and yet I do find myself at times pulled, and like it's why I was excited to talk to you of just like what would it look like, to have work or a career that just involves not no computers, but when you're out
Mm-hmm.
and you're backpacking, you're not on the computer, you're not
Nope.
on your email,
Nope.
you're not on technology, you're just in nature. There's a part of me that sounds appealing, and I guess I've kind of found this flow of like, well,
Mm-hmm.
at different periods work can be different things. It's a vehicle.
Yeah.
Sometimes work can provide money, sometimes it can provide security,
Yep.
sometimes it provides happiness and fulfillment. Ideally it's as much of those things as possible.
Yep.
I don't know, do you kind of see work in a similar way? I mean, it sounds like you have indexed towards work being very fulfilling, being very meaningful.
Yeah, that's actually I love that analogy too. Like that is a very important. So, for me, yes, for me, work needs to be fulfilling, and it's something I've been talking about a lot lately that I've realized with my guests. So generally, my guests tend to be, and this isn't exclusive. Sometimes they save and save and save for this one trip. Um, Tend to be more well off individuals, and so I always constantly think like, well, what if I did apply myself to marketing? It's like, sure, on my day to day, I might not have been, or like while at the job, I may not have enjoyed every second or as much of my job, but would I've enjoyed my outside life more because I have more money, I have more security, I have more stability. Um, and then I go to talk to them about, yeah, I'm doing this 22-day river trip, and they're like, oh, I would never be able to ever do that because I could never get that much time off of work. Like that's more than what most people take in an entire year off of work, and I'm doing it in one chunk. And so like it's there's a huge trade off. So on my day to day basis at work, I feel fulfilled. I feel um, happier. I'm in a place I truly desire to be. Um, but I have much less security. I have much less stability. I have a lot less of these other things. So it's really a trade off. I mean, we as humans, I think naturally always want to see that the other side is always going to be better, or like we romanticize these other things, although we don't truly want them. It's just easy to like see negative things and how things exist now and the positive in things and how things could be. Um, so like I don't knock, like I was very adamant about, like I don't knock anybody for any profession that they choose. Everyone's different in this world. If everybody was trying to spend out time in the outdoors as a living, our world would function very differently. And I would be annoyed because my solitude outdoor space would be overtaken with people. So like, um, I love, I think one of the reasons my job is so fulfilling because I get to take these people that don't spend much time outside and I really get to watch it light up their faces. Like I get to like see it all click. And you have these very successful people sometimes are like, oh no, you're doing it right. And it's like, oh, that feels good because it's like, it's one of my love languages is actually words of affirmation. So like they're speaking to me of like, no, what you're doing is correct. And it's like affirms my decisions in life. Because it's very easy for me to be like, man, I really, if I had applied myself in this other world, I could be retiring at 45 or 50 or whatever. But on the other hand, I could work until I'm 65 and have not done anything until I'm older. So yeah, I like that analogy of like, it's a different driver. One of the reasons it was easy for me not go back to river guiding is it's very feast or famine. It's not very lucrative. So I was like living. I mean, granted, I was spending a lot on money on drugs and alcohol, but like
Yeah.
I was living like literally, it would be like sometimes you get a tip and you're like, cool, I can buy some fried chicken from the gas station and I can buy a 6-pack of beer and then I hope I get a tip tomorrow so I can eat food. You know, like it was very much like not even paycheck to paycheck, but like tip to tip sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's, like you said, it's very different driving. Like, they all have different functions for different parts of your life.
Yeah, and like to me it's part of why there were periods in my life like I said I started in very traditional professional world as a full-time employee. And then when I left, I like labeled myself as, oh no, I'm an entrepreneur. And
Okay.
I'm kind of above full-time employees, blah, blah, blah. And then there came a time in my life where actually I wanted some of the financial security and
Yep.
stability, and it was going to further my career and my life, in my personal life, to go back to a full-time job. And then now I'm back on my own. So it's like, to me, if we throw out the sort of status quo of what work is supposed to be, if we think about what we want it to be in our life, and if we throw out any of these labels, then like in these examples, it's like I have a desire. I will at some point. My wife and I will go hike the Pacific Crest Trail at some point.
That's
And so
awesome.
then you're like, well, how are you going to take 5 or 6 months off of work? That's why I love just thinking of it as a vehicle. It's like, well, I'll just stop doing the work that I'm currently doing. I'll
Yep.
go take 6 months and then I'll figure out what work looks like after that. Maybe I'll go
Yep.
back to a full time job for a little while because I'll need some more money or stability. Or maybe before I go hike the PCT, I'll need a full time job for a little bit. So it's just like if we keep our minds open from a work standpoint, there's lots of ways you can navigate all of these things that are important to you in life.
Yeah. I love that. You and your wife plan on doing that together?
I think so.
Okay.
We've talked about, I mean, it would be a powerful, we have a friend, Deidre. I'm actually going to be interviewing her soon on the show.
Okay.
And she just did it this summer by herself. And
Mhm.
she has a partner, but she intentionally wanted the experience
Yep.
of doing it on her own.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure what it'll end up being. I think it'd be pretty cool if we did it together, but undecided.
Yeah, I know some people that go on their own and cuz you're not when you do the PCT, you're not on your own. You find like you find the people that are kind of doing the same schedule cuz eventually what happens is like you all start at this location and there's some people that are going to be doing 35 miles per day, which is like pretty extreme, and then there's going to be people that do 20 to 25 miles a day. And so you're going to find your group that you kind of like constantly run into at camp every night. And then, but then I know people that like, I know people who've done it alone and I know people who've done it as a couple too. And so it's like, honestly, if you're doing the PCT, there's no wrong way to do it. So long as you're out there getting it, like PCT's, kind of on my list. I've actually I think I'm going to apply for the John Muir Trail next year, which is like a 200-mile section of the PCT.
Yeah.
Because we actually run a guided trip with my company on the John Muir Trail, and so I want to be able to guide it. But to guide it, I have to do it first.
That's
So
awesome. Okay. I'm curious about, you talked about how you have, in some ways, maybe this is some of your guests This might be their first experience backpacking or spending this much time out in the backcountry. I'm just curious about like what kind of transformations have you seen within people that happen either during your time with them when you're out there, or maybe it's transformation or change that people make within their lives after they have this experience with you. What have you seen?
So, like, yeah, there's a good portion of people that you get that have never slept in a tent, that have never ever backpacked before or spent that much time outside. And like almost half of the people I've take have probably never slept in a tent in their life. Um, and so sometimes it's just, I mean, because we're all dynamically different human beings. So you get this range of stuff. I remember taking it was a couple sisters. I think one was like 18 and the other one was like 20. And they were with their parents and we're taking them on day hikes. And they were like, I've never almost even hiked before. Like I've done like 1 5 mile trail in my entire life. And but they had been training in a gym. So like they were just kind of physically fit girls. So they did really well. That's the biggest kind of like worry is like, how are they going to do physically? If they don't take it serious and they haven't trained, it's going to be a tough experience for them. But those girls, I remember, were like by day 3, were like, so what certs do you need to do this? And like what? And you can see like all these things firing off in their head, like, oh, I could potentially do this. And so I had real talks with them. I was like, um, generally speaking, at the end of every trip, I tell my guests, I'm now a resource for you. You have my email and my number. If you want to hit me up about, I'm a big gearhead too, so I know a lot about gear. And so, cool. You have questions on tents or trekking poles or things that you may need. If you have on itineraries, trips, whether we run them or not, um, like whatever it is, I am now a resource. And so I always try to like instill that in them, like use me as a resource. A lot of times they don't. Um, but then you kind of see people that have backpacked for the first time and like on the drive home, you see them going, so like, do y'all run trips in Colorado? I was like, yeah, we do. Like, oh, would you like, they talk to whatever their kid or their partner and like, hey, would you be like, do which ones would you want to do? Like Yosemite or Colorado? And they start talking about already their next trip after they just finished that last trip. And so those are my favorites. Sometimes you get people that are like, yo, isn't the Grand Canyon beautiful? And they're like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And you're like, yo, what? What? I mean, like, I've been below the rim over 100 days in like a year and a half. And every single time I walk down there, like, I'm about to do my 12th rim to rim in like a little over a year, which is like our most common hike or backpacking trip. And every time I still walk down to Ribbon Falls, I'm like, this is insane that this place exists. It's this waterfall smack dab in the middle of the Grand Canyon. It's like the origin story for the native Zunies. And it's like such a sacred place. I'm like, and this is I get paid to be here. Here I am, like so.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, how does that not become repetitive? Like you've done the same trip 12 times.
it just doesn't. I don't. For me too. Anybody that knows me knows that like I'm pretty obsessed with the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon has I've been to I think 15 different countries. I've lived in 8 different states. I've traveled a lot, living in vans and staying in. I spent like 6 months in Central America, 3 months in South America. So I've traveled all over the world. I would basically work my summer seasonal, whether it be farming or rafting, and then go travel for the winters. And the I've never ever ever had a place continually draw me in like the Grand Canyon. So in certain other places, like in Colorado, there's trips that I run that do kind of book. You can only summit a mountain so many times before you're like, all right, this is cool. And I guess you could say that about the canyon. Like you can only run the same trip in the canyon so many times. But for me, it's just there is. So I used to live in the redwoods also, and pretty much the 2 most humbling places in terms of just feeling like an insignificant little speck in on this giant rock that we're spinning around in space in is standing at the base of a redwood tree and standing at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You're just like, it's so hard to put into words.
Yeah, I mean, is that what draws you to the Grand Canyon in particular? Is just like that feeling of grand
Yeah,
grandness?
as some would say, it's a pretty grand place. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Like, and it's just so massive. So I tell people like, there's a spot we go to. It's called Plateau Point. You can look this way, and you can look that way, east, and you can look west, and that's 5 miles east that you're looking 5 miles west, and it is just like an incomprehensibly. People are like, this place is huge, and you're like, well, you are also looking at less than 5% of it, and like what they're seeing is just so insurmountably large, and they're just like, hold on, this is 5%. I'm like, yeah. And so it is like, I still have trouble comprehending how big it is. And so like that's why I'm stoked about doing this. It's 277 river miles that we're going to be rafting, and past like, I don't know exactly. I think past like river mile 140, I haven't even seen the rest of that canyon. And so I'm like, I get to see this extra 100 miles of canyon. And yeah, and even just my limited what I have seen, it's just like every turn's different. There's so many different waterfalls or canyons, summits. Like people think this of the canyon that haven't seen it is just a giant canyon with these sheer vertical walls, and it's just not. Inside of the canyon is all these massive peaks. There's over 250 summits you can do. There's drainage. There's like probably 100 canyons inside the canyon. Um, it's just such a humbling place.
That was exactly the word that I was thinking of was humbling, and
Yeah.
I've had that same experience with the Grand Canyon, and it's funny you talk about redwoods and sequoias, and I've had that exact same experience. I'm from Michigan. The
Okay.
first time when we were out west, and I sat next to or I went up to a sequoia tree, and like my mouth just dropped. I mean, my
Yeah.
jaw. I said to my wife, I'm like, I cannot believe this. Like, this is one of the coolest moments of my life. And we've been to, so many of the most beautiful
Mm-hmm.
places in the country. But it is very humbling to be humbled by nature. I just
Yes.
think it gives you perspective of like, oh, wow. Yes, my life is meaningful, but in the scope of nature and in all that exists, and when you're looking at one of those trees that has been around for thousands of years,
Yep.
and you're looking at a Grand Canyon that has been crafted and sculpted over hundreds of millions of years, you're just like, wow, I'm insignificant in the grand
Insignificant.
scheme
Yeah.
of the world and the universe. And I don't find that to be like a negative or bad experience. I find it to be a very humbling and
Yes.
just kind of perspective bearing experience.
Perspective. Like that's what it. You're like. So I've talked about holding on to less hate and anger in my life, and I try to deal from things with love, and that oftentimes goes out the window when I get in a car. I deal with road rage like I'm pretty good about it, but like as soon as somebody's doing something stupid in a car, I lose my mind. And so, but like just I say that because when you're standing at the base of a redwood or you're standing inside the Grand Canyon, you're like, that little bit of traffic sent me over the like. It's so insignificant. It's so who cares? Like, um, yeah, like you said, it's insignificant. It makes in a positive way. It's like, oh, all these other problems that I have. It's like this one little second blip in this infinite timeline that the world has existed in. So like, why am I just chill, just relax,
Chris, as we land the plane in this conversation, I mean, I guess I'm just curious, like, if someone's listening to this who, I don't know, hasn't had maybe one of these experiences in nature or finds themselves kind of out of touch with nature, I don't even know what my question is. What would be your message to them or advice to them of how to start to maybe get back in touch with nature or experience some of these kind of benefits that we're talking about? What's your message to them?
First off, just get outside. Like find a creek, find a river. Like rivers, like moving water for me is especially important. And so, whatever it is that hire a guide if you want, if you feel unsafe, or just go camp. Like, take it small steps. Like, you don't have to go hike the PCT to start off. Some people do that. That is a method, but like, you know, just get outside. And so I think one of the reasons Nate actually put me in touch with you, I don't want to like send this too far, but I guess my passion now is so I work with a company and I guide people. That involves me doing a lot of logistical stuff, including making dinner for them and washing their dishes and facilitating a lot of stuff. Makes their trip a lot easier. But I think what me and Nate are kind of trying to tag team, I think he might have talked to you about this a little bit, is that we're trying to eventually, this is kind of my own thing that I want to do, but Nate inspired me, is actually, I want to start my own backpacking company and I want to do men's retreats. So this space has existed as a so this space has existed as a space for men for a long time. So on the opposition of that, what has happened over the past 10 to 15 years is there's been a lot of female retreats that have been going on. And I love that. I grew up with 5 sisters. So like, I definitely have like an appreciation for the feminine energy. And I think it's super, super awesome that we've created a space for women to feel safe. But in the world that we've existed in nature, men had to be the tough, never vulnerable, hide your emotions and deal with your shit at all times. And so like, kind of what I want to do is a space for where I can share my story with people. And I think there's a bond that is created with men when they do hard things together. And I want to break them down physically so I can really get into them emotionally. And so I am trying to create a space for men, at least, to like empower them. The biggest thing is like, I want to empower people. So instead of cooking dinner for them, I'm going to make them like my own meals that I make for my guests, but I'm going to do it in different one serving portions for all of them. They're going to all have their own meal, but they're going to have their own stove and they're going to cook their own dinner. And we're going to teach them, like, I'm going to teach them how to filter their own water. And my whole goal is to empower them to be able to like, look, this has been such a healing place for me. And I want to like pass that along to others. So I know I went on a huge tangent. You were asking me about just generally how people, but like, that is kind of what I'm passionate about, is trying to get people outside and without having to use me.
Yeah, I think that's cool, man. It's the classic, teach a man to fish rather than just provide it for them. And I think that's a meaningful experience. Chris, if people wanted to learn more about you, follow what you're doing, and maybe some of these future things that you might create, what's the best way for them to do that?
So right now I'm kind of just funneling people towards my Instagram. This is in the very birthing stages of it. It's a lot of ideas. I ran like 4 backpacking trips in 4 weeks. So I haven't had a lot of time to put the footwork in. Tons of time to create ideas on the trail. But so funneling people towards my Instagram right now, which is Forever Youngs Adventures, with an S after Youngs. All one word, just lowercase, no underscores. Forever Youngs Adventures. And then I'm going to basically start building my, like, as a guide right now, I use a company and I know how to do all the guiding. I know how to run logistics. I know how to emails. I know like what they need to know, what they don't know. But I use a company because they provide business for me. And so right now I'm kind of funneling people towards an Instagram to kind of just rattle out business, or rattle out awareness for what I'm trying to do. And I've gotten a lot of great responses, and it's actually, I've actually gotten I was just talking about this with Nate. I've gotten way better responses from women than I have men about this, as more of a statement of like, our women want us to be better men. Like the world of women are wanting us to be better. And so, but anyways, so yeah, I'm really funneling people towards the Instagram at the moment. And then we're just going to build off of that.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm excited to see what the future adventures will hold. I selfishly would love to be a part of one of them. And,
absolutely.
I'm excited to see everything that unfolds for you. Thanks for joining me on the show. Thanks for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad.